Welcome to Legislature This Week, brought to you by West Virginia News, the State Journal, and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Legislature This Week is sponsored by Mon Health Systems, as well as SEVA WV and the West Virginia High Technology Consortium. In today's first segment, we're going to welcome Rick Rock, who's the director of North Central West Virginia Airport. It is Aviation Day at the Capitol, Rick. Tell us what's going on down there.
Oh, it's a happening place. Great turnout from all the airports around the state. The aviation community, aerospace is well represented, from companies to engineers to airports to associations. One of the best turnouts we've had for Aviation Day in a while.
Rick, is there anything on the agenda per se with your aviation companies that you're kind of charting through the legislature this year, or is it kind of just a, hey, don't forget us, we're out here, we're one of the booming industries?
Yeah, that's the most important thing, is just to keep that awareness up about how important aviation is and has become in the state of West Virginia. 2020, there was a study done for all the airports in the state, contribute 1.8 billion, in economic impact. Just did a proclamation in the House, $550 million in annual payroll throughout the state. So it's $75 million in state tax revenue that comes. So it's very important. We know that aerospace and aviation provides economic benefits and helps communities grow. Air service into your state, whether it be through general aviation airports or commercial airports, is very important and can be a driver of our economy.
Joining us today, Rick, is Charles Young, our senior government affairs reporter here at WV News. And I know you're familiar with Charles, and you guys have worked together on some stories in the past. Charles, what do you got for Rick today?
Hi, Rick. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Charles. I'm doing fine, thank you. How are you?
Doing well. I was hoping you could give us a little update on the Hope Gas proposal, the electrical microgrid thing. I know you guys signed the MOU that had the 90 days tied into it, so that means we're going to get a little progress by the end of February. Is that right?
We're hoping so. We have met with them again, continue to exchange information. Been down to Charleston a few times. We think it's has a lot of potential. Looking forward to them bringing back information to us based on the needs that we have, and just trying to put together the program that continues to really makes our Aerotech Park another tool in the tool chest to develop it to its full potential.
Mm-hmm. And I know when they made that proposal, one of the reasons that you'd want to run the airport's campus on this renewable energy microgrid is to appeal to advanced manufacturers. Have you guys had any conversations, any of those kind of companies reach out to the airport since that proposal's been in the press?
Yeah, we were able to meet with recently with Bloom Energy. We came down here and met with some of our delegates and had some nice discussions on some, how do we put together some packages. Certainly advanced manufacturing is what we're after. We think that that partnership will provide those opportunities going forward, because as we see, the energy costs are about 40 to 60% of the overall cost in those manufacturers. So we're able to keep those prices low and have sustainability and resiliency in our grid. That is something that's definitely very beneficial to those potential advanced manufacturers.
Rick, let me jump back in here for a minute, and let's talk about North Central West Virginia Airport for a moment. You mentioned some figures at the beginning there about statewide. What about North Central West Virginia Airport in terms of employment? How many counties are workers coming from? I know, people think, well, that's Harrison County, but it draws from a number of counties here in North Central West Virginia, doesn't it?
There's no doubt. I mean, we always say that we serve 22 counties, but, I definitely think that even more people, the zip codes are from all over the state of West Virginia. We have somewhere around 1,500 and growing direct aviation jobs at the airport. Our payroll there is over $100 million. Our economic impact is 1.1 of the 1.8 we've talked about for the whole state. So we know our role and responsibility to be a leader in it, and but we also know the benefit as we're successful. It allows the airports across the state to be successful. So we know we're leading the way in our responsibilities, but it's certainly as a whole West Virginia thing.
And then Rick, I wanted to, I know that right before the holidays, we finally, squared away the construction contract for the new terminal building. Just give us a little update on that. Everything's still on track to get started in the spring. I think that's what Sean Long, your deputy director, told me last time we talked.
That is correct. We just, President Van Gilder just signed our grant agreement for the $15 million. Yesterday, our contract, we expect that to, groundbreaking to begin. Officially we were talking April 4th, but we think we can get done a little bit before that. To begin, in March, we're hoping. We think that we anticipate an 18-month bill, but there's been talk about potentially getting it done in 16 months. So we have a display of our terminal rendering down here today. We're real excited, and we think that we expect it to move on, and a pretty aggressive schedule. But more than anything, we want to get it right.
Rick, do you think people understand? I mean, I'm a lifer here. Grew up in Harrison County. Years ago, even before my time, back in the 40s, the 30s, 50s range. I mean, what was then Benedum Airport was basically a grass field. And, some Harrison County leaders, some Marion County leaders had a vision. And do you think that anyone realizes just how far we've come from being a pasture to being such a mega area for aviation in West Virginia?
When I think about that, John, your comments, and, I really just got goosebumps just thinking about it because, those were visionaries and, what they were anticipating, but they had great hopes for what it could become, and we're real excited that I think we've done a good job in leading it to where we are today and positioning it into a point where it can continue to grow. But there's no doubt our forefathers had a lot to do with where we are today, and it takes vision, and the Benedum Airport Authority has always had visionaries, and they continue to do so today.
Rick, speaking of that vision, in the time that I've been covering the airport board, we had multiple, longer term projects. First it was the Move the Mountain project, then it was the terminal project. And I know, some of the folks on the board have talked about, those projects were 20 years in the making. You're talking about the future vision of the airport. What's next? The terminal building has been this long-term goal. We're finally going to get that done. What's the next long-term goal for you folks?
Well, that terminal's going to bring so many benefits. It's going to bring a lot of exposure and a lot of awareness, and the ability to move people in and out of West Virginia. The benefits of that are going to be immeasurable. The ease to get here, that gateway to the state, and a lot of times we are this, seem the center of attention, but we see ourselves as a building block and a partner for all the industries that need workers, but we can help to continue to grow. For us specifically, again, filling that AirTech park up, as we've said for a long time now, it's continuing to grow in that $1 billion economic impact. We do think that we'll have the ability to develop, another 100 acres that will just, in cooperation with, all the tech industry that goes on around us, just continue to build jobs, diversify the economy. Get that advanced manufacturing. We'd like to see some, potential, whether it be getting into the microchip development and those things that could potentially occur. We know West Virginia doesn't have a lot of flat land, and to be able to have, an AirTech park adjacent to a 7,800-foot runway, it's some of the most valuable property around, certainly in the eastern part of the United States. West Virginia has a great brand. I think really people across the country and the world have really started to recognize the specialness of West Virginia, its people. We have some great companies that are working here. The ability to continue to have ancillary businesses, entrepreneurs coming in, creating an entrepreneurial spirit will will drive the aerospace industry as we go forward.
You know, Rick, I think Charles and I, and of course you, we're so familiar with it, we sometimes forget. But just for our audience today, let's talk about the companies that are out there. Obviously, Mitsubishi. You want to give us a rundown of the big aviation companies you have there?
Yeah, I mean, think about in Harrison County, but with us, on the campus, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, Pratt & Whitney, Aurora, Boeing Company. We have some of the ancillary businesses, the EASW, North Star. We have HQ Aero, who helps supply the the workforce there. You can't forget about the synergy of the university and Pierpont itself. And all the federal support agencies that are there. But they continue to prop up KCI Aviation, Lockheed Martin's. They're all a part of really what has brought West Virginia on the map as an aerospace tech energy industry. And so those names there alone, most small communities like ours couldn't boast even one of those. So to have all that certainly has created a synergy that we can build on.
Rick, one last thing, and then we'll give you an opportunity to wrap up here. But you mentioned Pierpont and Fairmont State. There's an effort to try to build an additional hangar out there to increase the space available to train aviation technicians. And I know that's a high demand job. I believe the last time we checked, if you graduate, you've got a job the next day. Is that still the case? And, what's your thoughts on that need to drive that education effort?
Well, again, there's such an important part of that synergy. I mean, without it, with the workforce, because one, we have the expansions. We also know we're going to have the attrition of people who are reaching retirement age. It's critical to continue to grow that. So, the new Pierpont Aviation school that we're looking to build on our campus, to be able to increase their throughput, to be able to fill the jobs that we have now. There's jobs out there that we need people to fill, and they're actively recruiting. The growth of the MHIs and the Pratt Whitneys and even the Lockheeds and the Aurora Boeings and the smaller ancillary companies. The school, what they provided is certainly, it needs to grow. They talk about being able to produce up to 200 people a year as we continue to educate and improve awareness to all the younger kids. I think long term, some of the shortcomings we have now in filling some of these jobs, but organically as we grow that and grow the awareness, I see a bright future for that. There's also a shortage of aviation pilots. I mean, it's plaguing the aerospace aviation industry across, and we need to get that fixed, and we're going to play a part in that. Fairmont State does a great job in their program. So, I mean, we play a really good part, and our role is very important, and to continue to keep this a resilient, sustainable industry in West Virginia.
Rick, is there anything else you'd like to add to kind of wrap us up?
I wish you guys could look around and see all the great people we have in the state of West Virginia that from all over the state that are down here to promote their airports. No matter how big they are, if they're big as what we're doing, our economic impact, but some of the smaller ones, I mean, I think that they've seen from some of our successes, what is really possible. So there's a lot of excitement in the room, a lot of intelligent people that are leading this industry, and I'm proud to be a part of it.
Rick, we thank you for joining us here on Legislature This Week, coming to you live from the Capitol Rotunda. That is Rick Rock, and it is Aviation Day at the West Virginia Legislature. Again, Rick, thank you for joining us, and we'll be right back after this message.
Your heart is in the best hands. MonHealth Heart and Vascular is the highest ranked cardiovascular program in the state of West Virginia by the American College of Cardiology. Choose MonHealth. Feel the difference.
Welcome back to Legislature This Week, brought to you by West Virginia News, the State Journal, and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Legislature This Week is sponsored by Mon Health Systems, as well as SEVA WV and West Virginia High Technology Consortium. Joining us now is Senator Mike Oliverio from Monongalia County. Mike is a first-term senator, so to speak, but he's had years' experience. Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, and then we'll jump into some questions for you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me today. I served 2 years in the House of Delegates, and then 16 years in the state Senate, and then the last 12 years I've been out of politics. Gave me an opportunity to coach my kids' teams and go to their dance recitals and all the fun stuff of parenting, but I did miss serving the people of West Virginia. So last year I ran for the Senate to return, and I want to thank the voters for this opportunity to come back to work on their behalf.
Well, Mike, there's a lot of issues going on down there, but I think the one on everybody's mind, all West Virginians, because it's going to impact us one way or the other, is the personal income tax plan that Governor Justice has proposed. It's passed the House overwhelmingly, I believe, on a vote to 95-2. I know you serve on the Senate Finance, I believe, and I know you guys have had some meetings on it. Where do we stand? What's going on with that?
You know, obviously the Senate has seen the action of the House and the governor's intent. The Senate is exploring the idea of maybe going a little bigger, a little bolder. The governor's plan right now calls for a 30% cut in the personal income tax, with a 10% cut next year and a 10% the following year, getting to a point over a 3-year period in which our state income tax would be reduced by 50%. The Senate is exploring opportunities to have that 50% cut occur immediately. And that's going to require moving some dollars around and trying to, do some other things. But that's what the Senate is exploring right now. Can we afford, based on the budget surpluses, based on the performance of our economy, can we afford to cut the personal income tax by 50% starting right now?
I'd like to come back to that. So you're talking 50% immediately. Is there any plan, because the governor has indicated he'd love to be able to eliminate the tax totally. Is there anything that would say we're going to do 50% this year and then 10 more and 10 more? Or is it just let's do 50% and see where we're at?
Yeah, I think right now we're looking at that possibility of can we do 50 now? And it could offer tremendous relief. The other thing is, we think if it's possible to do the 50, that might even motivate that remote worker working somewhere else in the country to say, hey, maybe I should move to West Virginia. Maybe I should take my family there. Maybe that means $6,000 in income tax that the person wouldn't have to pay. And maybe in 1 year's time, that might not make sense. But if that person thinks, hey, I'm going to work another 20 years or more, maybe all of a sudden a 50% cut, significant savings, and what's the impact to my family over time? And what quality of life can I offer my family if I bring them to West Virginia? The rural nature of our state, the outdoor recreational opportunities, the close-knit family value things that we love about West Virginia. Can we trigger that person to come here with a 50% cut out of the gate? And that's what we're exploring in the Senate.
Well, that's an excellent viewpoint, and this is the first time we've heard that, so that's some breaking news for us here on Legislature This Week. Joining us today, too, Mike, is Charles Young, our Senior Legislative Affairs, Governmental Affairs reporter. Charles, I believe you've got a couple questions for Mike there.
Sure. Mike, before we started recording, you were talking a little bit about PEIA. The problems with PEIA going all the way back to 2018 were sort of the catalyst for our teacher strike. We've had to do lots of, one-time allocation, short-term funding measures since then. Do you think we're finally on the precipice of seeing an actual long-term solution so we don't have to keep revisiting this session after session?
I would say we're at a point where we're looking at two things. The first thing we're looking at is much more than a Band-Aid, but it is a short-term fix. And what we're looking at is an initial allocation to shore up the cash at PEIA so that our public employees will not have to pay an increase in premiums. We recognize that our citizens are facing 40-year high inflation, and to ask them to pay increased premiums in PEIA right now really is not going to work. So we have an initial allocation of about $19 million that that will allow us to not increase premiums on our public employees. Then we have a $40 million piece that is designed to enable PEIA to reimburse our West Virginia hospitals at a rate 110 times that of the Medicare rate. Right now, they're reimbursing at a rate of 59%. So every time a hospital provides service to one of our public employees, the people that work for us, every time they do that, the hospital is losing money. And I think as an employer, we have a responsibility to ensure that those hospitals are being properly reimbursed, because at some point they could say, hey, we're not going to provide we're not going to provide health coverage to people who have PEIA. So this big step, a cost of about $40 million, is going to increase that reimbursement. Now, it's especially important to me because in my district, we have more public employees than any district in the state. But more than that, in my district, we have more hospital employees. So I want our public employees to receive quality health care, and at the same time, I want to keep the paychecks continuing for all those hospital workers that live in my district as well. And so this $40 million will help us for a period of time enable PEIA to reimburse at a rate much more appropriately than they're reimbursing now. And then beyond that, there's another chunk of money that could be in excess of $80 million that would go into PEIA and help shore up some of the instability. All of those things will help us for a short period of time, but we need a long-term fix that we have not yet developed.
Can I jump in there just a minute? Any ideas for that long-term fix? I know you're a finance guy, that's your background. Do you have any thoughts on what could be done to give us that more long-term fix 5, 10, 20 years out?
Yeah, a few of the things are being discussed. Maybe giving a public employee a certain amount of income to allow them to go out and buy health insurance coverage, to go to the quote exchange and buy coverage. Not sure that's a great idea, but it's one of the options being discussed. Another option being discussed is the idea of transferring out of PEIA altogether, having a private insurance company come in and offer this coverage, us stepping up significant dollars to help do that. I was one of the architects of Brick Street Mutual when we moved our state-run workers' comp system to the private sector. And then I was one of the architects creating West Virginia Physicians Mutual when we had the medical malpractice crisis, and we helped create a private sector insurance company. Both of those companies were mutuals, and I work for a large mutual company, and that's been my background, understanding how mutuals work. And so that may be an option to end up creating a company, helping with initial funding and getting out of PEIA. Because PEIA is structurally flawed. It's not based on the way a normal health insurance would work. Typically a health insurance company would price health insurance on you based on your age, based on your health, those kinds of things. PEIA bases your premium based on how much money you make. And while that is fair to public employees who don't make a lot of money, it doesn't really enable an insurance company to perform like it should. So that's our challenge.
Yeah, you're not even looking for PEIA to be profitable. You just want it to be able to break even so the taxpayers don't have to continue to take, tax funds out of the general fund to prop it up, is what's been going on for years.
Well, I think at the end of the day, we will continue to need taxpayer dollars. But again, as I stated, these are our employees. They work on behalf of the state and our other governmental entities. So it is our responsibility as a state and our taxpayers to pay our state employees and provide them health insurance. So there's a balancing act there. The problem is, if nothing is done, in about 3 years' time, we're looking at a cliff of about $376 million that would have to come from those taxpayers to subsidize those public employees' health insurance needs. And we're certainly trying to avoid that.
Mike, you obviously have a good handle on that. It's good to know we've got people down there like yourself who has a background in it. And I thought you were around when Brick Street was occurring, and then that West Virginia Physicians Mutual was really key to helping stave off. There for a long time, even the bigger hospitals, WVU Medicine, Mon Health, were having trouble attracting physicians because of some of those concerns. So hopefully we'll see some positive change out of PEIA. Charles, another one you have?
Yeah, Senator, I want to ask a little bit about Senate Bills 161 and 162. Those have already, completed the process. Those are the carbon sequestration bills, that would allow the leasing of some space under some DNR land. Could you talk a little bit about how that gets us closer to our hydrogen hub projects? I think that's what this is all tied into, and it seems like there was quite a bit of consensus on the Senate side on that.
Yes. These bills came about as a result of some economic development opportunities that we want to pursue. And we want to pursue those quickly, and as we get economic development prospects, we need to deal with them in a confidential manner. But at the same time, we want to send them a clear signal that West Virginia is in fact open for business and we're willing to work with you. And the other states that compete for these projects that don't call economic development prospects back, that don't follow up on the needs that they have, we want to be the shining example that says, hey, we will work with you, we will help you accomplish your goals and objectives to bring investment to West Virginia and to create jobs. And we desperately need that. And these two bills really help do that. It's fascinating. All these years I've served in politics, we've always talked about what was under the surface. Whether it was methane gas or coal or all these issues on pooling and all these things. And we're finally now talking about the porous space under the surface where things can be stored. And it's kind of fascinating how we've come full circle here. But that's a part of what this legislation deals with. And I think with the economic development prospects that we have met with personally, I think there is the potential for the biggest economic development prospect opportunity in the history of the state by far as a result of these two bills. And as time progresses, we'll be able to talk a little bit more about that, but that's the reason for those two bills.
It really made me kind of think of the nuclear repeal ban that was passed last session, a similar kind of bill that, it just says we are open to having that conversation, allowing that business to come in, but it doesn't necessarily mandate that we do anything or begin a project right away. Am I correct?
Right. It just gives us opportunities. I think many of us that have looked at the energy issues realize that West Virginia can be an all of the above state. We can pursue other things. Our coal and our natural gas will always be important, but let's look at the other things and see how they can become a part of our grid and make sure that West Virginia isn't one of those places where you have public service commissioners telling you to turn the lights off, turn the heat down. We don't ever want to find ourselves in that situation.
That's great. Well, and then, go ahead, John.
No, go ahead, Charles. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to ask if, in kind of our last question here, if you could kind of reflect on the way the political dynamics of the legislature have changed over the years. When you were there, previously Republicans weren't enjoying the power and the numbers that they have now. What is it like for you to step back into the arena with you guys, firmly and fully in control?
The Republicans take an approach where every morning at 7:30 we have a caucus meeting here in the Capitol. And everything is discussed, the day's kind of laid out, members express concerns and ideas, and it's been a very collaborative approach. I've enjoyed it, and they've looked to me as kind of sometimes the old guy in the room to say, hey, how did you do that before? Why did this be done in that manner? And it's really given me an opportunity to contribute my experience that I've had through the years, but then also just to bring fresh ideas. So I've enjoyed the way the process has been working. We are 15 days into a 60-day session, and I see a good session ahead.
Well, Michael, anything you'd like to add to wrap up there?
Well, I heard a bell ring, so that's calling me to the Senate floor, so I need to run. A little side project I'm working on, tourism is very important, and I'd like to see us capture more tourism dollars in our district, District 13, Marion County, Monongalia County. I'd love to see us expand the offerings at Prickett's Fort. I'd love to see us put an awning over the amphitheater out there and do some things to draw more people into our community. I'd love to see us put some cabins at Cooper's Rock so that we can have folks come and stay a night, a weekend, maybe even a week. and then grow those number of cabins. So those are some things I'm trying to work on behind the scenes to help increase tourism into our community. We've got great universities with WVU and Fairmont State, and I'll be a champion for those institutions as well.
Well, I tell you what, I thought I heard a bell ring, so that's why I was wanting to go ahead and proceed. Thanks for jumping in. We love the fact that with your experience down there and your background, again, some great answers today, Mike, and thank you very much. Mike Oliverio, the senator from Monongalia County. Thank you very much. We'll be right back after this.
Here's the better opportunity you're looking for. Enhancing health and wellness of our community, one patient at a time. Apply today at monhealth.com/careers. Choose Mon Health. Feel the difference.
Welcome back to Legislature This Week, brought to you by West Virginia News, the State Journal, and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Legislature This Week is sponsored by Mon Health Systems, as well as SEVA, WV, and West Virginia High Technology Consortium. Joining us now is Delegate Sean Hornbuckle, who is the Minority Leader Pro Tem in the House. Sean, thanks for joining us.
Good morning, and glad to be here.
Well, I tell you what, you guys have a little bit of an uphill battle because in the Democratic Party, you guys are the minority now, and but you guys have been putting out some statements, putting out some issues, and one of those that attracted our attention here is the Democrats' effort to amend the tax bill that would have completely eliminated personal income tax for those making less than $80,000. Tell us what the reasoning is and what your hopes are to accomplish there.
Well, I thank you for that question. And the first thing we wanted to do, as we've said all along, we want to be the adult in the room. And so we looked at it from a fiscal standpoint. We originally thought that it was a little lofty of a price tag. However, if that's what the governor wanted to do, and that's what he wanted to commit to, we said, okay, well, we can work with that. And so when we reworked the numbers, we said, well, it has been a stance for as long as I can remember to eliminate it completely. And so we started, messing with the numbers, and we found that if we were to completely 100% eliminate an income tax for those making under $80,000, it would essentially match up to the price tag and what they were willing to commit to. Now, when you dig a little bit deeper, 72% of West Virginians make less than that 80,000. So that was going to be 72% of people. One thing to note here as well is that while they would get a complete tax cut, everybody else that's above that would still be to enjoy in a tax cut as well. And so our bill, in contrast, was going to help low-income folks, middle-class folks, and the wealthiest of the wealthiest. Whereas in contrast, their plan was sort of set up to really just help the wealthy folks.
Do you remember the percent? What was the percentage of the income tax? If you make less than $80,000, you wouldn't pay any. What were the cuts for those above $80,000? I don't remember seeing that anywhere, so shed some light there for me.
So that would be anybody. So let's say that you're Brad Smith, all right, and you're a billionaire, okay? The first $80,000 of your earned income that year will be completely tax-free. And so I guess technically that would be, 28% of West Virginians will receive a fraction of a cut, but it still would be equitable. Another thing to note here is that is the bread and butter of our population. So that's going to encompass your low income folks. It's also going to encompass a lot of your small business owners. And with that, those folks, it's a very hodgepodge group, that 80,000 and less. And so you have people in there that are literally struggling just to make ends meet. And then you're starting getting on that, that bottom crust of the middle class as well. And so they're going to put all that money right back into the economy. Again, I can't reiterate enough, is helping our small business folks that are local in everybody's community, those local mom and pops.
Well, thank you for explaining that, because that clears up a lot, and it does make a lot of sense. It's a nice proposal, and hopefully, do you think that they'll consider it as it keeps working its way through, or?
I would hope so. I mean, it just makes sense. The analogy that I use, or comparison, is the tax cut, which I voted for because I want to give relief if I can get it, and that's part of the compromise here. But the tax cut that they were championing was going to help the car dealership owner, okay? The tax cut that we want was going to help the car dealership owner, the mechanic, the salesman, the floor manager, and that little white-haired lady that's trying to buy a little vehicle on a fixed income.
Excellent point, Sean. Excellent point. Hey, along with us today is Charles Young, West Virginia News' governmental affairs reporter. Charles, I know you have some questions for Sean.
Sure. Hey, Sean, so, we talked about, the current makeup of the legislature. Could you talk a little bit about the future for Democrats in West Virginia state government? There are, so few of you guys left. What's the long-term plan to turn the tide?
So that part of that long-term plan is trying to be, like I'll keep saying it again, you're probably gonna get tired of that, is being the adult in the room. And I've told people this session that there's going to be times where some people, some Democrats are not going to like that we are going to agree on some Republican issues. And then you're going to have a lot of Republicans that are not going to agree with the initiatives that we're pushing. And so we want to be a part of that radical middle in our state. That population is still here, it's still living here, and we want to be the biggest voice in the room for them. Bringing common sense back to this Capitol, and we think little by little we'll be able to chip away. And unfortunately, some of the policies that are being pushed at this Capitol, I have a feeling that the bulk of our population is going to understand that we have gone too far right in that direction, and we're going to start being more center.
Well, speaking of a time when you're going to have to, be an adult in the room, we've got a couple of public hearings scheduled in the next few weeks on a couple of the most, contentious bills that have been offered so far. On the 9th, we're going to be talking about the Anti-Stereotyping Act, and on March 7th, the Anti-Racism Act. We all saw how contentious the public hearing around abortion were over the summer.
Yes.
What do you think is going to happen, and do you think anybody on the right is going to listen to what the public has to say?
I would hope so. We were elected to do just that. Unfortunately, it seems time and time again that a lot of those folks, they're leading by ideology, and they're not truly listening to our public. Again, our public is right there in the middle, and these policies go way too far, and they're just hurtful to our educational system. We heard last year through testimony, it's going to hurt our students trying to get to college. That's going to water down their curriculum, and so you're telling me that you're willing to do something through ideology and just to try to get elected with a small minute of people, that you're going to mortgage the future of our children with the higher education and the college boards because their curriculum is going to be watered down? That's crazy, all right? Why are you wanting to do this? And that's the question that we have to keep asking. Those courses that they're talking about, they're not even taught. They're not high school level courses, and they're not even taught in our state. And again, there's something else that's out there that they're reaching for just to rile up, again, a minute portion of their base. It's actually sort of sad.
How much do you think that occurs right now? I mean, it does seem like a lot of bills are introduced that are aimed at 3 to 5 to 10% of the population, and it's kind of, like you mentioned, everybody over here in the middle kind of get neglected.
Yeah, and that's what it is. We're living in a time where people value their seat that they're sitting in rather than the people that they've been sent here to represent. And that's what we're going to do as Democrats. We're going to be that force that's charging through the middle and galvanizing all the people in West Virginia.
I have to ask, there's a couple bills that have been pushed through, and I believe the Senate, the campus carry bill in regards to the colleges. All the colleges kind of spoke out against it. It's still out there. Yeah. It's moving forward. And then we've heard that in the House Education Committee this afternoon, they're going to be talking about allowing teachers to carry guns in public schools. What's your thoughts on those?
Well, one, it hasn't been vetted properly. And I'll start with the first one, the campus carry. Just got sent to the House today from the Senate. I would ask you a question. Why would we send a bill that has to do with education to judiciary first and not go to education? I want the public to know what we're doing up here. There's no reason in the world, if we've had people from Marshall University, our faculty, West Virginia University faculty, West Virginia State, Concord, Fairmont, everyone in unison is speaking out against this. And they don't even have the courtesy to send it to the correct process, through the education committee. It just questions why. Why are we doing this? And so Hopefully, the bill that we have on today in education, the concealed carry for K through 12, hopefully we run that through a proper process. But there's still a lot of questions with that. Are we going to do a rigorous screening process for who's being able to do this? Are we going to have, psychoanalysis being done? Who is going to be accountable for this? So there's just so many questions. And I would also say, if we put the same amount of energy that we're putting into people to have firearms on campuses and around 7-year-olds into our mental health system, okay, into looking at adverse childhood experiences, if we put that same amount of energy to look at what is causing some of these things to every once in a while to occur, then we wouldn't need this over here. So, again, we've just got to start thinking from a common sense standpoint and go for it that way.
Well, I tell you, after Sandy Hook, Senator Manchin had a seminar or a public hearing here in Clarksburg at Robert C. Byrd High School that was attended by a lot of educators. And that very issue, as far as allowing public educators to carry guns, came up. And there was like 2 or 3 people that were like really pro, yeah, we got to do it. But there were a lot of kindergarten teachers and a lot of elementary school teachers that we don't need guns in schools. We need mental health support. This is after Sandy Hook. That's been a number of years. Okay, we're still talking the same issues here. How do we get that message across? How do we change it?
Unfortunately, and again, I'm somebody who I've been able to work across the aisle. I will continue to work across the aisle because I represent everybody, and I mean that. But we've got to do a better job of electing folks, again, that are going to listen to the masses and do things from a common sense standpoint. And unfortunately, right now, we're not doing that.
Charles, follow up?
Well, I just wanted to ask, Sean, is there anything that you're working on that we're not paying enough attention to or you think hadn't gotten enough press so far this session? I know we're only a quarter of the way through, but what have we overlooked?
Well, I will start off by saying that I think you all are familiar. We might have talked about it a little bit. The Marshall University, 75 Memorial Day that we were able to pass. Big kudos and thanks to Chairman Phillips, and Vice Chairman McGeehan, who made that the #1 bill coming out of GovOrg. And so it was a very good bill. I think it's going to help to really look around the state. That was an awful tragedy that happened November 14th, 1970. But the other underlying issue, it was a lot of community in Huntington, the state, and around the country, quite frankly, that banded together to try to heal those wounds in helping us go from ashes to glory, as we say in the Jewel City. And so that's something that we're really excited about. We were able to work in a bipartisan fashion. But we have to be able to bolster the PEIA system. And talking about Governor Justice, a good friend of mine, and I actually have my baby dog tie on today. We need to be making a big splash, and the big splash is to finally, once and for all, make a meaningful pay raise to teachers. That's something that I think we should be looking at in an education standpoint. For about 8 years now, we haven't done anything about the disproportionate suspension and expulsion rates for children of color and also children with special needs. That has to be top priority. We have everything else coming before us, but for some odd reason, we haven't took the time to help in that regard. So that's something I'm hoping we can do. Also want to give thanks to Governor Justice. We've been working on something for a little while, a business partner that I know down in Huntington, Dr. Alan Letton, and we're going to start the CEDA office. So that CEDA office, it is a Center for Economic and Community Development for African American in Appalachia. But the good part about that is the research and data, we're going to be able to transfer that to other isolated communities. So like Southern West Virginia, some communities in the Northern Panhandle and all over the state that are dealing with disadvantages. So we're really excited about that. And last but not least, I have a bipartisan bill that you all will see soon that is dealing with cannabis, adult use cannabis. And I think it's very important for the people to decide, all right? And so it's going to be a constitutional amendment for the great folks of West Virginia to give it an up or down vote to see if they can have freedom, being able to do what they want to do, but also being able to get some extra revenue. We have a lot of lofty goals with this income tax, and I will tell you that looking at the economic forecast, the energy sector is going to be quite volatile after you get past 2025, and so I want to think forward and see income tax relief is much needed for West Virginians, but how do we keep that money coming in that's going to be able to support that? And I think cannabis is a good start.
Sean, I tell you what, we really appreciate you joining us here on Legislature This Week, and we really appreciate your common sense approach to governing. And I'm sure there's days that you feel like you're beating your head against the wall, but realize that, like you said, there's a lot of West Virginians in the middle there that appreciate the effort. Anything else to wrap up?
I just appreciate the both of you all. I appreciate this opportunity to talk to everybody in West Virginia. And remember, the Democrats, we're going to be the adult in the room, and we're going to put forth good legislation. We're going to support good legislation, but we're going to be very, very critical when we're doing crazy stuff up here. So.
Well, Sean, I tell you what, we appreciate you. And for Legislature This Week, we're going to take a brief break for a message. Thank you very much.
Your heart is in the best hands. Mont Health Heart and Vascular is the highest ranked cardiovascular program in the state of West Virginia by the American College of Cardiology. Choose Mont Health. Feel the difference.
Welcome back to Legislature This Week, brought to you by West Virginia News, the State Journal, and West Virginia Public Broadcasting, and sponsored by Mon Health System, SEVA WV, and the West Virginia High Technology Consortium. Joining us now is West Virginia Auditor J.B. McCuskey, who joins us to discuss key legislation he's tracking, as well as efforts he's made in the Auditor's Office to improve the Mountain State. J.B., welcome to Legislature This Week.
Hey, thank you guys so much. I wish I was in studio with you in my hometown there of Clarksburg, West Virginia.
Well, I tell you what, we're glad you're able to join us from the Capitol Rotunda. Also with us today, JB, is our co-host, Charles Young. He's West Virginia News' senior governmental affairs writer. Charles, we'll let you kick off the questioning.
Alrighty, well, I wanted to start by asking you a little bit about your involvement with Senator Weld in the TikTok ban. You know, he was the first one that brought that up. You kind of joined the conversation saying that was already in your power to address a little bit. Talk a little bit about, why the government needs to intervene in TikTok.
So the government in this instance is intervening in the government itself. So what we're doing is banning the government from using TikTok. I have a little bit of an issue when the government starts to intrude into the private marketplace, but in this particular instance, the government of China wishes to do the people of this country harm, and they'll do anything in their power to get a hold of our information, to be able to hold us hostage, to be able to take control of our assets, to try to have leverage against us in any way that they possibly can. TikTok, while it might be fun, it is not worth the risk to allow our employees to be using a social media platform when the risk is the incredibly valuable and the incredibly important financial information of the people of the state of West Virginia is at stake.
Well, JB, I know that shortly before we began taping today, you released a legislative agenda. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're tracking down there?
Yeah, sure. So the first and maybe our most important bill has to do with China once again. So last year we passed Senate Bill 552, and we took the idea of demolishing dilapidated buildings from a non-issue to an issue in a year. And just in 1 year's time, we've spent $10 million tearing down dilapidated buildings all across our state. People that live in Clarksburg and in Harrison County and all over north central West Virginia understand that when we're doing economic development, making our cities and counties shine matters. As a corollary to Senate Bill 552 this year, what we are doing is ensuring that people from countries of concern are not able to buy our state's property. So we are banning nationals from the countries of China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, North Korea, and others from purchasing our state's mineral interests and our farmland. Because like with TikTok, they will use any vehicle they can to own parts of our country, to be able to hold us hostage and to leverage our interests against ourselves. And so we believe that this is, it's a bold first step, but it's a step that needs to happen.
What else might you be tracking down there?
Yeah, so we have another bill that we're really excited about called the Prompt Pay Act. What we found in the auditor's office is over the last 6.5 years, our bureaucracy has a hard time paying its vendors on time, or in the amount of time that vendors are accustomed to being paid in the private marketplace. And so what this bill does is it requires the state government to pay all of our vendors in 45 days, or they face a penalty that is payable to the vendor. We think this is a fair way to lower the cost of every single thing that the state has to buy. The faster we pay, the less money we have to pay for it. And on the other end of this is our charities, particularly through DHHR, whose job it is to watch after our at-risk children, to watch after the elderly, to make sure that those who don't have food are being fed, are paid way too slowly. So they have what's called a reimbursable grant. And what happens is they send their invoice to the state, and 180 days later it gets paid. But in the interim, they got to make payroll, and they got to pay their employees, and they got to pay rent, and they got to pay insurance just like everybody else. So what they do is they take out a line of credit at the bank. Interest rates are 8.5% right now. So the people that are doing the hardest work for the people that need it most are wasting an enormous amount of money simply because our state bureaucracy can't get its ducks in order. And we believe that this bill will go a very long way to solve that problem. And interestingly, we've spent the last 6.5 years trying to get these bureaucracies to do this properly. I hate legislative intervention. It's always better when it's done properly on its own, but we found that we were unable to effectuate the change that we needed to, and now we're asking the legislature to step in and help us solve this really, really important problem. A third bill that we're really, really interested in is our office runs what's called the State Purchasing Card Program. And what this does is it enables us to buy goods and services using a credit card that has a cash back program, just like the one you have at home. It also gives our office a real-time window into what our bureaucracies and local governments are buying, so we can utilize our artificial intelligence fraud monitoring and help us identify spending that's inaccurate or inappropriate. But recently the Visa, MasterCard, and American Express have decided that they want to track how people are purchasing firearms using codes within their system. We believe that the Second Amendment is a sacred part of the United States Constitution. We do not believe that it's appropriate for any company to be tracking how our citizens are purchasing or owning legal firearms. And so we are introducing a bill that enables us to dock on the bid for anybody who wants to do business with our office enough points to where they're going to have a hard time winning the bid if they are tracking the firearms purchases of our fellow mountaineers. And we think that this is a free market way to solve this problem, because at the end of the day, a bank is going to say, I can do $2 billion worth of business with the state of West Virginia if I simply don't do this one simple thing. If I don't track who's who's purchasing firearms, and we believe this will be a very powerful way to curtail what we believe is unconstitutional behavior. The last thing that we're working on, our office is what's called the Securities Commissioner for the state of West Virginia. So we're responsible for enforcing and regulating all of the state securities rules. Like anybody who's ever remembers the Jeffrey Epstein saga, also people that remember the sagas in New York where unscrupulous investors were taking people's money and using them in pyramid schemes. It's our office's job to monitor that and regulate it. Here we find, unfortunately, because of our aging population, there are a lot of our older West Virginians who get taken advantage of in phone scams. The biggest problem is after we prosecute these people and put them in jail, there's no money left to pay the people who've been scammed back. So we are creating a fund that will enable us to repay people who've been scammed out of their money, and the fund will then be continued to be replenished with the money from those who have done our West Virginians harm. We think we're working with AARP on this, who's been a wonderful partner, and we're looking very, very forward to that bill passing and protecting our West Virginia seniors.
Well, I'm sure Charles probably has a follow-up to some of those. Go ahead, Charles.
Well, yeah, I wanted to go back to what you were saying about your championing of the dilapidated buildings issue. So the goal there is to create a statewide program that would allow municipalities from incurring the full cost. Could you walk us through how such a large system would work?
Sure. So it is our plan to appropriate enough money to tear down all the dilapidated buildings at once. There are economies of scale in the removal of dilapidated buildings, and what we found is our local governments frequently don't have enough money to do it themselves. And so the idea that we have to have them pay for it and pay them back doesn't make any sense. We should, as the state, be handling this problem on our own and having the cities be our partners to identify the buildings that need to be torn down, getting them in the proper legal framework to where we can tear them down, and then allowing us to do a giant statewide bid that maximizes every single dollar so that we can tear down 10,000 houses instead of 5,000 with the same amount of money.
would the municipalities then still be able to auction that land and retain the money?
So actually, it's our office's job to auction that property. And one of the things that Senate Bill 552 did is it changed the order of those who have the ability to buy this property. It starts with the neighbors now. So if you are an adjoining property owner, you have first right to buy any piece of tax delinquent property in the state of West Virginia. You're the person who is affected the most by a dilapidated building if you're on either side. After that, it goes to the Economic Development Corporation, the city and the county. They have every opportunity they can to buy any property they need to do the large-scale economic development projects that they all have in mind. Does the corner of the street need a Sheetz? Does it need a grocery store? Does it need a green space with a playground? I don't know that, but our municipal and county leaders have a very good handle on how that property should be used, and we believe that they should be in control of that property first. And then lastly, the general public has the ability to, as they always have, to bid on these properties and buy them in the same way that they were before. But what we're doing, and the reason why banning China and Russia and Saudi Arabia and North Korea is so important, is we're trying to get unscrupulous buyers out of the process so that all of our minerals, all of our farmland, and all of our property is winding up in the hands of mountaineers who have the best interest of mountaineers at heart. And we believe that the core interest of Senate Bill 552 is to make sure that that happens, and this next step in banning these countries of concern is wildly important to make sure that that the totality of that issue is being effectuated.
I wanted to jump in and follow up on the prompt pay, because I've been around a long time, and I know that's been a complaint of vendors who deal with government agencies. And, I always heard that, don't expect anything for 120 days at a minimum. That is so important because, those agencies are doing important work. The businesses are out there supporting other community efforts, paying their taxes on time and things like that. For you to take that step to make that happen is a great move. And it is disappointing that you've had to go the legislative route to get it done, but it's good to see you do that. Some further thoughts there? That's
Sure.
been a big goal of yours, hasn't it?
It has been, and both fortunately and unfortunately, I'm not usually the bureaucracy's best friend. I am somebody who has been very, very committed to reforming our state bureaucracy into a small, efficient agency that captures its own data. And again, I've been running my head into the wall a lot, but one of the things we focus on in my office a lot is in state government, what we do is we cut twice before we measure. And every person who's worth their salt knows that you have to measure twice before you cut. And we don't even collect the data to enable ourselves to measure. So if you have to ask yourself, if we're failing at infrastructure, our DHHR is failing in so many ways, we are failing in our schools in so many ways, right? Has anybody in the government ever stopped and admitted and said, hey, we're not getting the job done? I haven't seen it. And the idea here is we have to admit when we're failing, but we also have to take the next step. We have to collect data to understand why that failure is happening so that we can reform the process in a very meaningful way. What I found in the legislature was that when a bureaucrat would come and talk to us and we'd say, why aren't you getting the job done? Their answer was what? We don't have enough money. Well, eventually you're going to run out of other people's money, right? And so what we're trying to do is to say, if this is a process problem, and we believe it is, think about this. We spent $4 billion on education, $7 billion on DHHR. The federal government just gave us $12 billion to redo our infrastructure, and we borrowed $2 billion more to do our roads, right? This doesn't feel like a spending issue to me. This is a process issue. And if we can turn our state government into a place that is very focused on collecting data, understanding why their processes are failing, we're going to be able to do better, create better results for our taxpayers and all of our agencies by creating processes that make that happen, instead of simply taking the lazy route and saying we need to spend more of your money to get it done. I think we can do better with less, and we've done that in our office.
I know you've been a big supporter, an early advocate of AI, artificial intelligence, to help streamline processes. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we developed a first-of-its-kind AI fraud monitoring system. And we were talking about our state's purchasing card program before. So we run every one of the tens of thousands of rows of spending data that the state creates from our purchasing cards through an AI system. What this has enabled us to do is to cut our staff, to streamline our process, and to find more fraud. We've already found 3 frauds from our state purchasing card program just in the first 3 or 4 months of the application of this system. And what's really impactful and meaningful about this is that we are first, right? We are the first people who have taken this next step to utilize AI in a way that fights back against people that are trying to hurt us. In the race to the end of AI, right, bad and good people are going to be using it. And it is dumb for good people to say, I'm too scared of that technology to utilize it. What we need to do is we need to be better than the bad people. We need to use it as a sword that's bigger than their sword, and we need to make our government as efficient and as and appropriately sized as humanly possible using every piece of technology at our fingertips. And that this is a great first step at doing that.
You know, as we move towards wrapping up here, JB, I have to ask you, I mean, what's your plans in 2024? Are you still seeking the governorship? You've done a great job as the auditor. I think some people would love to see you stay there as well.
So here's what I'll say. I have to talk about all the plans with my wife, who owns a business that quite frankly makes it so our family has money. She's the breadwinner, and then our two children and our dog, obviously. I don't know if I need to talk to her, but apparently we all have to talk about our dogs anymore. But being the governor of the state of West Virginia is, for anybody who was born here, for anybody who has seen the suffering and anybody who has felt the promise of what West Virginia is, would be the greatest honor of anyone's lifetime. It would be crazy for me to not think about that. And it is something I'm thinking about, but I do think in the meantime, the one thing we need to change everyone's eye level at here is that we do have a lot of success happening in West Virginia. There are ribbons being cut at a pace that I've never seen, but there are still a myriad of problems that can be lost in the shuffle of ribbon cuttings, right? We have people all over the state that are hungry. We have more children in West Virginia in foster care than we ever have. We have more opioid deaths than we've ever had, right? Our school system needs to be reformed. We have people all over the state who don't have access to clean drinking water, right? We can't get gas lines out to economic development sites. There are so many things that we can do to help the West Virginians who have built this economy right now. And I think we need to make sure that we maintain a laser focus on ensuring that our current West Virginians' lives are being improved in the best way possible, and we're ensuring their children have access to prosperity. And so everything I do in the auditor's office and everything I do going forward will be focused on that, because for me this is really about public service. It isn't about what I want. It's about how can I serve? How do my talents, how do the things that I believe in help the average West Virginian have a better tomorrow than they have today?
Well, JB, we want to thank you for joining us here. Anything else you'd like to add, or?
No, I'm just so thankful to you guys for doing this program. It really is a giant asset. You know, one of the things that we talk about in our office is that my district is everywhere. We've been to all 55 counties 9 times, right? And so you guys providing this service to the people in North Central West Virginia who are an hour and a half away, might not have as much access to the capital as everyone else, is really an important function, and I'm so thankful that you guys are doing it.
Well, I tell you what, I know in our past discussions, and you spoke at one of our 40 under 40 events here at the Robinson Grand one year, you know, your passion and desire for West Virginia just flows forth in pretty much every word you say. So we do appreciate your efforts there. We appreciate you joining us here on Legislature This Week, and we're going to be right back after this message.
Here's the better opportunity you're looking for. Enhancing health and wellness of our community, one patient at a time. Apply today at monhealth.com/careers. Choose Mon Health. Feel the difference.
In today's final segment of Legislature This Week, we're pleased to welcome back Randy Yohe, the Senior Government Affairs Reporter for the West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Randy, thanks for joining us again. I know you've been putting in some long hours down here.
As farther we go into the session, the busier it gets. And in the next couple of weeks, wait, and they start meeting on Saturdays and Sundays.
Well, I know any updates at all on the income tax plan? That's still hot and heavy in everybody's mind, I think.
Well, the last I had a one-on-one with Senator Eric Tarr, head of the Senate Finance Committee, and it's pretty common knowledge that he said that it's no-go and DOA when the House bill of Justice's 50% personal income tax increase comes to the Senate. So what are they going to propose instead? It's going to be a hybrid of Amendment 2 again, of trying to cut those business and inventory taxes along with the vehicle tax. But since that has to be done by constitutional amendment, what they're going to propose is what Justice brought up earlier, was a rebate plan. And there's a lot of mechanism problems in, rebating taxes, rebating vehicle taxes. We're waiting to see the final thing that comes out. What's interesting is TAR told me, I says, how are you going to do all this? I mean, the mechanism of a rebate in this kind of scale is going to be tough for the state to handle for every person here. He said, well, might just last a couple of years, and then they'll realize the error of their ways, and they'll go back to making that constitutional change, and we'll go back to Amendment 2 again, and we see justice is on the road again, so the tete-a-tete continues.
One thing we heard earlier was Mike Oliverio was on earlier, and he told us that the Senate might propose making a 50% cut the first year. He's on the Finance Committee, and he was talking about just biting the bullet and saying we're doing the 50% cut. Have you heard anything along those lines? We were surprised by it.
I have not. I've really only talked to TAR and then in general speak, if you will. So that's interesting because, there's a number of factions that are within both the House and the Senate, and there's some people that are on this side, some people that are in the middle, some people are on this side. And, if we can see them get together, that might be an accomplishment for the people of West Virginia that want some kind of tax cut.
Well,
the important thing is, though, is that's 25%. If this 50% thing goes through, that's 25% of the state's budget. Where are they going to get the money to, pay for infrastructure and roads, to increase these salaries by 20% that Justice is talking about at DHHR and with Child Protective Services, to teachers' salaries? If it's going, something's got to come in somewhere.
Hey, Charles Young, our senior legislative affairs reporter, is with us as well. Charles, why don't you and Randy exchange some ideas there?
Hi, Randy. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine, Charles. How are you?
Doing well. I read the story you did yesterday on Senate Bill 128, the attempt to limit the governor's emergency powers. I wonder if you could walk us a little bit through there. It seems like this is another, reaction to COVID bills. Could you tell us how that limits the governor's powers?
Yeah, they approved an amendment from Capito, head of the Judiciary Committee, that basically, this goes back to last summer's interims, where they just had decided, many legislators in both the Senate and the House, that Justice usurped his powers during the COVID period, that he waited until the end of 2022 to end this, where they could have done it long before, that maybe he didn't spend all those federal millions of dollars in the proper way, that maybe some of his restrictions weren't aligned with how some of these legislators feel. So, boom, they were going to come in, Blair got it out there the first day in the Senate, and now it's being bounced around at the House. After what they want is if the governor has to declare a state of emergency or preparedness, he'll get 30 days. It was 60 days earlier. Amendment says 30 days, and then the legislature reviews it. And the reviewing powers are stronger than you might think. Before, in the original legislation, it said, well, the governor just will have to sign off for another 30 days. I don't think it's going to be that easy anymore. With the way the bill is set up, it's going to be more scrutiny. Plus, it gives the legislature more power to talk about the time, extent, and intricacies involved in what might happen during a state of emergency. What about churches? What about schools? I thought it was kind of interesting that they may say, you're going to you can restrict firearms and weapons, but not alcoholic beverages. Don't restrict those during an emergency. So after it was ironed out, that's just going to go back to the Senate now, see if they approve that amendment, which they probably will, and then it's done. That one's done. It'll go, and so what's the governor going to do? You wouldn't think he'd veto that, would you?
Well, it seems as though he's trying to, be very, very diplomatic, especially with this tax thing coming up at his, briefing the other day. He went out of his way to, point out that he was above that he was not offended by that. But so whether or not that's actually the case, I guess we'll see. But he's gone out of his way to say, no skin off my back if that's what you guys want to do.
And if I'm not mistaken, even if he would veto it, they would have the votes to override that veto.
That's my understanding as well. So I think that's, like you said, it's pretty much a done deal.
Yeah, I think that emergency powers legislation is a done deal.
Well, and then I wanted to ask, Randy, were you able to follow the campus carry discussion yesterday?
Chris Schultz followed that pretty close. What's interesting is this afternoon I'm going to the Education Committee, and one of the House Bill 2549 to permit teachers in K through 12 schools be authorized to carry concealed firearms as a designated school protection officer. What I'm interpreting that is that any teacher, it can be designated a school protection officer and be allowed to carry concealed weapons. So it's not just campus anymore. What these legislators want to do is take the Second Amendment to the nth degree, it seems, and the debate goes on, with who should have a gun where. And so that's going to be interesting. Also on this Education Committee agenda is to modify student discipline rules. And I've talked to a number of people, and that's a huge problem in our schools, and it has been for years, and it's disproportionate among minorities and blacks, and there's been legislation to get more behavioral health and mental health people into schools to help countermand some of these discipline problems. I mean, a teacher can't teach if they're unruly to no extent, So those are two very interesting points that I'm going to look closely at this afternoon at the Education Committee, and we'll follow up with that on our show, The Legislature Today.
I just saw the arming teachers bill this morning. That was the first I'd seen about it. Have you heard any discussion of that? It seemed like it kind of popped up. I mean, it seems like that's where the logical slippery slope of campus carry is going to end up, but I hadn't heard any discussion of that at all as of yet.
I haven't. I thought they were talking about making sure that school resource officers that have that kind of training could be armed, but arming. No, this is new. I mean, it's new to me at least, because there's what we got, 800-900 bills out there. It's hard to discern, but this was news to me as well, and I'll be very interested to see how it shakes out.
Well, as you mentioned, I was just going to say, as you mentioned earlier, I think we're about a quarter of the way through the session. We're getting to the point where everything is really, starting to pick up. How do you, as a reporter, you mentioned, Chris, how do you keep up with everything going on both sides? You guys split it as a team and try and keep your eye on everything?
Well, we appreciate the daily notes that the communication directors for the House and Senate, Ann Nalai and Jackie Bland, send out. They're very detailed. They let us know what's going to happen the next day in each committee, what's going to be on the special calendar. There's a House calendar and a special calendar. A House calendar is where bills go to die. Special calendar is where bills stay and live. And then in the morning, before we take off, we have a morning meeting, and Chris Schultz and I, the two main reporters for Legislature Today, will discern. Chris covers the Senate mostly, I cover the House, but we'll go back and forth sometime, and we'll sit down with our news managers and see what's going to shake out and what's interesting. We saw the Education Committee today. There's some things that Chris is looking into regarding a number of different human rights issues, and we try to balance that. So it's not just taxes all the time. That we kind of let people know everything that's going on, even though there's big elephants in the room.
I want to jump back in there and go back to the school situation. I attended back right after Sandy Hook. Senator Manchin had a large gathering at Robert C. Byrd High School here that had a lot of educators in it, and that came up back then. And there was a lot of discussion about, from teachers that were like, no, we don't want that. So it'll be real interesting to see how that shakes out. There were probably 2 or 3 teachers among 30 that were like, oh yeah, I want to be able to carry a gun and I'll defend, But the majority of them at that meeting, and this had been years ago, but were against it. And in speaking to educators, I will tell you that the majority of them have voiced that they would oppose that type of legislation. Of course, that doesn't mean it won't pass. So,
yeah, that's what we heard in the campus carry from our colleges and universities around the state, starting with Marshall and WVU. They came out with strong opposition to campus carry. And then the regional public schools, West Virginia State, Concord, all of their presidents came out either against it or hedging quite a bit, saying, we're worried about mental health on campus. The two magic words that they compensate with this are behavioral and mental health. If we have these kind of guns on our campus and we don't have the proper behavioral and mental health facilities, people, availability to keep things straight in this crazy world that we live in right now, we're worried about what might happen. So it's always a give and take there, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. Well, listen, as we wrap up, Randy, you mentioned it earlier, and you and I were talking before we began about last night's segment. West Virginia Public Broadcasting is doing a great service by bringing back their daily show. Why don't you tell us what's coming up on it for tonight and in the future?
Well, last night just really briefly, we talked about the Coalfield Communities Grant Facilitation Commission, a very long title of a commission that was formed 11 months ago and still hasn't been. The governor still hasn't appointed people there, and its sole job is to go through the 41 counties, coalfield counties mostly, and give them matching grant money when they apply for federal grants. You always have to give 20, 30, 40%. These communities don't have that money, so the state's supposed to supply it and then help them write the grants and administer it too. And there's people clamoring for that. And we're holding the Department of Economic Development, Commerce Department, and the Executive Department accountable because they haven't organized this commission yet. Even though Speaker Hanshaw told me there are municipalities right now that are applying for and receiving these grants. I don't know how, I don't know who, nobody will tell me who. So I had a little talk with Mitch Carmichael last night, the Secretary of Economic Development. He agreed with me. He said, yeah, this is problematic. 11 months is too long. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. So that's one thing that I'm going to follow very closely. I've followed this story for 2 years.
Yeah, I watched that segment, Randy, and as I was telling you earlier, it was extremely well done. Lots of great information. I found it very interesting that Speaker Hanshaw was, saying, yeah, we're distributing the money, and I'm like, well, how is that going on?
It's the cart before the horse. And you heard Bob Brunner, our host, say that it looks like, how years ago the seats of power were in the coal fields of southern West Virginia, and now it looks like it's moved to the Eastern Panhandle. That's where it seems things are emanating. It's not Charleston-centric anymore. It's not coalfield-centric. The Eastern Panhandle is kind of leading the show.
Well, I tell you what, we really appreciate the work that you and Chris and the team at West Virginia Public Broadcasting are doing down there, and we appreciate you guys joining with us here at Legislature This Week. Once again, we appreciate all the contributors we had today. And our audience, as always, join us again next week for Legislature This Week, live from the Capitol Rotunda. Until then, have a great week.
Your heart is in the best hands. Mon Health Heart and Vascular is the highest ranked cardiovascular program in the state of West Virginia by the American College of Cardiology. Choose Mon Health. Feel the difference.